The public land survey system is the surveying method developed and used in the United States to plat, or divide, real property for sale and settling. Also known as the rectangular survey system, it was created by the Land Ordinance of 1785 to survey land ceded to the United States by the Treaty of Paris in 1783, following the end of the American Revolution. Beginning with the 7 ranges, in present-day Ohio, the PLSS has been used as the primary survey method in the United States. Following the passage of the Northwest Ordinance, in 1787, the Surveyor General of the Northwest Territory platted lands in the Northwest Territory. The Surveyor General was later merged with the General Land Office, which later became a part of the U.S. Bureau of Land Management, or BLM. Today, the BLM controls the survey, sale, and settling of the new lands, and manages the state plain coordinate system. History of the system. Originally proposed by Thomas Jefferson to create a nation of yeoman farmers, the PLSS began shortly after the American Revolutionary War, when the federal government became responsible for large areas of land west of the original 13 states. The government wished both to distribute land to Revolutionary War soldiers in reward for their services, as well as to sell land as a way of raising money for the nation. Before this could happen, the land needed to be surveyed. The Land Ordinance of 1785 was the beginning of the public land survey system. The Continental Congress was deeply in debt following the Declaration of Independence. With little power to tax, the federal government decided to use the sale of the Western territories to pay off American Revolutionary War debt. It has been expanded and slightly modified by letters of instruction and manuals of instruction, issued by the General Land Office and the Bureau of Land Management, and continues in use in most of the states west of Pennsylvania, south to Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi, west to the Pacific Ocean, and north into the Arctic and Alaska. Origins of the system. The original colonies continued the British system of metes and bounds. This system describes property lines based on local markers and bounds drawn by humans, often based on topography. A typical, yet simple, description under this system might read: from the point on the north bank of Muddy Creek 1 mile above the junction of Muddy and Indian Creeks, north for 400 yards, then northwest to the large standing rock, west to the large oak tree, south to Muddy Creek, then down the center of the creek to the starting point. Particularly in New England, this system was supplemented by drawing town plats. The metes and bounds system was used to describe a town of a generally rectangular shape, 4 to 6 miles on a side. Within this boundary, a map or plat was maintained that showed all the individual lots or properties. There are some difficulties with this system. Irregular shapes for properties make for much more complex descriptions. Over time, these descriptions become problematic as trees die or streams move by erosion. It wasn't useful for the large, newly surveyed tracts of land being opened in the West, which were being sold sight unseen to investors. In addition, this system didn't work until there were already people on the ground to maintain records. In the 1783 Treaty of Paris recognizing the United States, Britain also recognized American rights to the land south of the Great Lakes and west to the Mississippi River. The Continental Congress passed the Land Ordinance of 1785 and then the Northwest Ordinance in 1787 to control the survey, sale, and settling of the new lands. The original 13 colonies donated their western lands to the new Union, for the purpose of giving land for new states. These include the lands that formed the Northwest Territory, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. The state that gave up the most was Virginia, whose original claim included most of the Northwest Territory and Kentucky too. Some of the western land was claimed by more than one state, especially in the Northwest, where parts were claimed by Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut, all three of which had claimed lands all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Applying the system. The first surveys under the new rectangular system were in eastern Ohio in an area called the Seven Ranges. The beginning point of the U.S. Public Land Survey is located at a point on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border between East Liverpool, Ohio and the Pittsburgh metropolitan area, on private property. A National Historic Landmark marker commemorating the site lies on the side of a state highway, exactly 1,112 feet to the north of the point. Ohio was surveyed in several major subdivisions, collectively described as the Ohio lands, each with its own meridian and baseline. The early surveying, particularly in Ohio, was performed with more speed than care, with the result that many of the oldest townships and sections vary considerably from their prescribed shape and area. Proceeding westward, accuracy became more of a consideration than rapid sail, and the system was simplified by establishing one major north-south line and one east-west line that controlled descriptions for an entire state or more. For example, a single Willamette meridian serves both Oregon and Washington. County lines frequently follow the survey, so there are many rectangular counties in the Midwest and the West. Non-PLSS regions, the system is in use in some capacity in most of the country, but large portions use other systems. The territory under the jurisdiction of the 13 colonies at the time of independence did not adopt the PLSS, with the exception of the area that became the Northwest Territory and some of the southern states. This territory is now Georgia, Connecticut, Delaware, Kentucky, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Tennessee, Vermont, Virginia, and West Virginia. The Old Cherokee lands in Georgia use the term section as a land designation, but does not define the same area as the section used by the PLSS. Maine uses a variant of the system in unsettled parts of the state. Other major exceptions to PLSS are, California, before statehood in 1850, was only crudely surveyed with the boundaries of Spanish and Mexican land grants only roughly described. Since statehood the PLSS has been used mostly throughout. Hawaii adopted a system based on the Kingdom of Hawaii native system in place at the time of annexation. Louisiana recognizes early French and Spanish descriptions called arpents, particularly in the southern part of the state, as well as PLSS descriptions. New Mexico uses the PLSS, but has several areas that retain original metes and bounds left over from Spanish and Mexican rule. These take the form of land grants similar to areas of Texas and California. Ohio's Virginia Military District was surveyed using the metes and bounds system. Areas in northern Ohio were surveyed with an earlier standard, often referred to as Congressional Survey townships, which are just 5 miles on each side instead of 6. Hence, there are 25 sections per township there, rather than 36. Texas has a hybrid of its own early system, based on Spanish land grants, and a variation of the PLSS. Wisconsin had French settlement prior to the PLSS in the areas of Green Bay and Prairie du Chien. Both have small amounts of the long, narrow French lots along some water frontage. Michigan had French settlement prior to the PLSS along the Detroit and St. Clair rivers, and near Sault Ste. Marie, Marquette, and Ypsilanti. These were all examples of the French long lots. Parts of Washington, Oregon, Idaho and Wyoming were settled as donation land claims. Some were established before the Willamette Meridian, and those established after were often poorly surveyed and didn't correspond to the PLSS. However, the vast majority of these states use the PLSS. Survey design and execution. Commonly used terms aliquot part, a terse, hierarchical reference to a piece of land, in which successive subdivisions of some larger area are appended to the beginning of the reference. For example, SW1/4NW1/4S13, T1S20E refers to the southwest quarter of the northwest quarter of Section 13 of Township 1 South Range 20 East. See further discussion below. Baseline, a parallel of latitude, reference to and established from a designated initial point, upon which all rectangular surveys in a defined area are based. Also spelled baseline. BLM, Bureau of Land Management, the successor agency to the General Land Office, cadastral, having to do with the boundaries of land parcels. Corner, the point of intersection of any two actual or potential survey lines, defining one corner of a rectangular land parcel. Lot, a subdivision of a section which is not an aliquot part of the section, but which is designated separately. A lot is typically irregular in shape and its acreage varies from that of regular aliquot parts. Initial point, the starting point for a survey. The intersection point of the principal meridian and the baseline in a given region. Land grant. Historically, a land grant is an area of land to which title was conferred by a predecessor government, usually Spanish or Mexican, and confirmed by the U.S. government courts after the territory was acquired by the United States. Monumentation, placement and/or marking of physical objects on the ground to mark survey points and lines. PLSS, Public Land Survey System, original survey, the first official government survey in a given area. Unless fraud is proven, the original survey is legally valid and binding, regardless of any surveying errors that may have occurred. All subsequent subdivision, sale, etc. must proceed from the original survey. In the United States, most original surveys were done under contract with the General Land Office. Principal meridian, a true meridian running through an initial point, which together with a baseline, form the highest level framework for all rectangular surveys in a given area. The list of all principal meridians is given below. Public domain, land owned and managed by the federal government. Synonymous with public lands. National parks and national forest are a large part of the public domain land today. The original public domain included the lands that were turned over to the federal government by the original 13 states, and areas acquired from the native Indian tribes or foreign powers. Range, a measure of the distance east or west from a referenced principal meridian, in units of 6 miles. Section, an approximately 1 square mile block of land. There are 36 sections in a survey township. Township, synonym for survey township, that is, a square parcel of land of 36 square miles, or a measure of the distance north or south from a referenced baseline, in units of 6 miles. Witness, any marker set on the ground that marks or represents some other, nearby object or location of surveying importance, such as a corner. A bearing tree is a witness to a survey corner. Survey design equals, the surveying of any regional area, such as a state or two, is a multi-step process. First, 2 controlling survey lines are established, a baseline, which runs east-west, and a principal meridian, which runs north-south. The locations of the 2 are determined by a previously chosen initial point, where they originate and thus intersect. Next, at a defined distance interval, commonly 24 or 30 miles depending on the year and location, standard parallels of latitude are established parallel to the baseline. The meridian, baseline and standard parallels thus established form a lattice upon which all further surveying is then based. Subsequent work divides the land into survey townships of roughly 36 square miles or 6 miles on each side. This is done by the establishment of township and range lines. Township lines run parallel to the baseline, while range lines are true meridians and thus run north-south. Each are established at 6-mile intervals. Lastly, townships are subdivided into 36 sections of approximately 1 square mile and sections into 4/4 sections of 0.25 square mile each. The intersection of a township line with a range line constitutes a township corner, of a section line with any other type of line a section corner, and a point halfway between any 2 section corners a quarter corner. The federal government typically surveyed only to this quarter section level, the subdivision of smaller parcels being carried out subsequently by private surveyors after original sale. Because the survey design is 2-dimensional, while the actual Earth is 3-dimensional, adjustments to land areas must be made periodically to prevent error propagation. Not all sections can be 1 square mile, nor can all townships be exactly 36 square miles. More specifically, all north-south running lines, as with the prime meridian, are always established with reference to true, geodetic north. But it is a physical impossibility to meet this condition and still maintain a rectangular land grid, because such lines converge on the North Pole. They are meridians. These adjustments are done at 2 different scales. At the small scale it is done by starting the sectional surveys in the southeast corner and moving progressively toward the northwest corner. The algorithm used is to move northward to establish the 6 easternmost sections, then move west at 1 mile intervals, repeating this process until the western side of the township is reached. The result of this is that the northernmost and westernmost tiers of sections are -11 in alle are thus allowed to deviate from 1 square mile, but the other 25 sections are not. This method accommodates the curvature problem within a township, and it also allows for any errors made during the surveying itself which were nearly unavoidable due to the physical difficulty of the work and the crude equipment used without overly compromising the basic rectangular nature of the system as a whole. At the larger multiple township scale, the standard parallels mentioned above allow a longitudinal resetting of township corner locations, so that townships' widths do not continually decrease as one proceeds north. Thus, corrections for curvature of the earth exist at two separate spatial scales: a smaller scale within townships, and a larger scale between multiple townships and within standard parallels. A specific and terse location descriptor is always used, in which the townships and sections are indexed based on the township's position relative to the initial point, the section's location within the designated township, and the principal meridian reference. Township, range, and section are abbreviated as T, R, and S, respectively, and cardinal bearings from the initial point by N, S, E, and W. Each principal meridian also has its established abbreviation. Thus, for example, the description T1S a 20 ES 13 MDM reads as follows: Township 1 South, Range 20 East, Section 13, Mount Diablo Meridian. That is, the 13th section in the first township south of the baseline and the 20th township east of the principal meridian. Since township and range lines are 6 miles apart, the T1S a 20E part of the designation instantly places the location somewhere between 0 and 6 miles south of the baseline, and 114 and 120 miles east of the principal meridian. Knowing how sections are numbered within townships, we identify section 13 as therefore occupying the 1 square mile located 2 to 3 miles south, and 119 to 120 miles east, of the Mount Diablo initial point. Note that the sections within a township are numbered in an unconventional, boustrophedon pattern, in which alternating rows are numbered in opposite directions, starting from section 1 in the northeast corner and ending with section 36 in the southeast corner, as per figure 2. Therefore, section 13 is adjacent to the eastern range line of the designated township. Numbering in this pattern ensures that numerically sequential sections within the same township are physically adjacent, and share collinear boundaries. Survey execution, measurement equals, distances were always measured in chains and links, based on Edmund Gunter unregistered trademark S66-foot measuring chain. The chain, an actual metal chain, was made up of 100 links, each being 7.92 inches long. 80 chains constitute 1 U.S. survey mile. There were 2 chainmen, one at each end, who physically made the measurements, one of them typically also acting as compassman to establish the correct bearing at each chain placement. In forested areas, it was essential for rapid progress and accuracy that the lead chainman follow the correct bearing at all times, since no straightening of the chain was possible without backtracking around trees and remeasuring. It was also necessary to keep the chain level, since all surveying distances are based on the horizontal, not slope, distance. In steep terrain, this meant either shortening the chain, or raising one end of the chain relative to the other, or both. In areas where measuring by chain was not possible, such as extremely steep terrain or that with water obstructions, distances were calculated by triangulation. Survey execution, monumentation equals, monumentation is the establishment of permanent on-the-ground objects that mark exact locations of surveyed points and lines. They are the legally binding markers used for setting property lines and as such are the culminating work of any survey. They consist of both corner monument as well as nearby accessory objects that witness to them. Witness objects allow subsequent surveyors and landowners to find the original corner monument location should the actual monument itself be destroyed. It was not uncommon for squatters or homesteaders to destroy corner monuments if they felt the patenting of the land would threaten their residence on it. For this reason, destruction of corner monuments, or their accompanying witness objects was, and still is, a federal offense. At corners, corner monuments are established to mark their exact location on the ground. As with most PLSS specifications, those for corner monumentation also changed over time. In the 19th century, monuments were commonly a rock pile, a wooden post, or a combination of the two. Trees could be used if the corner happened to fall at the exact spot where one grew. In the 20th century, steel pipes with caps, supported by mounds of rock, became required. Witnesses can be trees, rocks, or trenches dug in the ground. Their exact locations relative to the corner, and the markings made on them, are also recorded in the surveyor's official field notes. Witness trees at corners are more commonly referred to as bearing trees because the exact distance and bearing from the corner, to them, was required to be recorded. On each bearing tree, 2 blazes were typically required, one about chest height and easily visible, and one at ground level. On the exposed wood of the blaze, surveyors were required to inscribe, with wood chisels, township, range and section information, on typically either 2 or 4 bearing trees, if they were within some reasonable distance of the corner away. Bearing trees are of vital importance not just for these land boundary purposes, but also for their use by ecologists in the estimation of historic forest vegetation conditions before settlement, and large-scale human disturbance, of the land. No other data set comes close to providing this estimate of original forest composition and structure, and the data have accordingly been used very heavily. Along survey lines, monumentation was much less elaborate, consisting primarily of only the blazing and some very simple scribing of trees directly on, or very close to, the survey line. The purpose was simply to help retrace a surveyed line should that become necessary. It was also additional proof that the line had in fact been run correctly, especially in those cases where the blazed line tree's pertinent information was recorded in the field notes, as they often were required to be. Information to be recorded equals, what was to be observed and recorded by the surveyors during the execution of the work varied over time. Furthermore, how well individual surveying parties actually met the requirements or recommendations at the time, also varied. The following is a list of the more commonly required landscape and surveying items that were either required or requested be noted, over much of the 19th century. The precise length of every line run, noting all necessary offsets therefrom, with the reason and mode thereof. The kind and diameter of all bearing trees, with the course and distance of the same from their respective comers. And the precise relative position of witness corners to the true corners. The kinds of materials of which mounds are constructed the fact of their being conditioned according to instructions, with the course and distance of the pits, from the center of the mound, where necessity exists for deviating from the general rule. Trees on line. The name, diameter, and distance on line to all trees which it intersects. Intersections by line of land objects. The distance at which the line first intersects and then leaves every settler's claim and improvement. Prairie, river, creek, or other bottom, or swamp, marsh, grove, and windfall, with the course of the same at both points of intersection. Also the distances at which you begin to ascend, arrive at the top, begin to descend, and reach the foot of all remarkable hills and ridges, with their courses, and estimated height, in feet, above the level land of the surrounding country, or above the bottom lands, ravines, or waters near which they are situated. Intersections by line of water objects. All rivers, creeks, and smaller streams of water which the line crosses. The distance on line at the points of intersection, and their widths on line. In cases of navigable streams, their width will be ascertained between the meander corners, as set forth under the proper head. The land's surface, whether level, rolling, broken, or hilly. The soil, whether first, second, or third rate. Timber, the several kinds of timber and undergrowth, in the order in which they predominate. Bottom lands, to be described as wet or dry, and if subject to inundation, state to what depth. Springs of water, whether fresh, saline, or mineral, and the course of the stream flowing from them. Lakes and ponds, describing their banks and giving their height, and also the depth of water, and whether it be pure or stagnant. Improvements. Towns and villages. Indian towns and wigwams. Houses or cabins. Fields, or other improvements. Sugar tree groves, sugar camps, mill seats, forges, and factories. Coal banks or beds. Peat or turf grounds. Minerals and ores. With particular description of the same as to quality and extent, and all diggings therefore. Also salt springs and licks. All reliable information you can obtain respecting these objects, whether they be on your immediate line or not, is to appear in the general description to be given at the end of the notes. Roads and trails, with their directions, whence and whither. Rapids, cataracts, cascades, or falls of water, with the height of their fallen feet. Precipices, caves, sinkholes, ravines, stone quarries, ledges of rocks, with a kind of stone they afford. Natural curiosities, interesting fossils, petrifactions, organic remains, also all ancient works of art, such as mounds, fortifications, embankments, ditches, or objects of like nature. The variation of the needle must be noted at all points or places on the lines where there is found any material change of variation, and the position of such points must be perfectly identified in the notes. Sizes of PLSS subdivisions. The following table indicates some distance and area conversions in the PLSS. List of meridians. Based on the BLM Manual's 1973 publication date, and the reference to Clark's spheroid of 1866 in Section 2 to 82, the coordinates listed are believed to be in the 27 Namibian dollars datum. Social impact. Railroad land grants equals. The Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 was the first major land grant specifically for the Transcontinental Railroad. This act provided surveyed, public lands for a railroad right-of-way to build rail systems, and millions of acres to raise the capital needed to build and maintain the future railways. 10 square miles of land on each side of the proposed rail track were granted for every 1 mile of completed railway. The U.S. Public Land Survey system was utilized for measurement. Every 1 mile railway completed was akin to a section. If the railway ran predominantly east and west, a 10-mile range of 1 square mile sections were allotted on each side of the 400-foot right-of-way. If the railway ran predominantly north and south, a 10-mile township of 1 square mile sections were allotted on each side of the 400-foot right-of-way. The land was granted in alternating sections. Each odd-numbered section going to the railroad company. Each even-numbered section kept by the government. This created a checkerboard pattern along proposed railway. This was supposed to guarantee that railroad access would increase the value of not only the railroad-granted sections, but also the government-owned sections in the checkerboard. The system was devised by Senator Stephen A. Douglas, with political support from Senator Jefferson Davis. Education equals, under the 1785 Act, Section 16 of each township was set aside for school purposes, and as such was often called the school section. Section 36 was also subsequently added as a school section in western states. The various states and counties ignored, altered or amended this provision in their own ways, but the general effect was a guarantee that local schools would have an income and that the community schoolhouses would be centrally located for all children. An example of land allotments made specifically for higher education is Ohio's College Township. Survey fraud equals, there were numerous incidents of fraudulent or bad surveying reported, arguably in nearly every state. The remote nature of the land being surveyed certainly enabled the opportunity for fraud to occur. The most notorious, large-scale, and costly fraud was perpetrated by the Benson Syndicate, operating primarily in California in the 1880s. Metric system adoption equals, the U.S. Public Land Survey system is considered one of the major points of contention in the adoption of the metric system in the United States. The U.S. Public Land Survey system has used the Gunter's chain as a basic measurement. The measurements of every plot of ground in the United States have been made in acres, feet, and inches, and are publicly recorded with the titles to the land according to the record system peculiar to this country. a Franklin Institute of Philadelphia. Because of this, redefining property boundaries could create a large amount of legal issues and property owner confusion. Many local zoning laws are defined in feet per square feet. Conversion of units for surveyors are not always simple and complex decisions are frequently required. Urban design as roads have typically been laid out along section boundaries spaced 1 mile apart, growing urban areas have adopted road grids with mile-long blocks as their primary street network. Such roads in urban areas are known as section line roads, usually designed primarily for automobile travel and limited in their use for non-motorized travel. In post-World War II suburbs, commercial development has largely occurred along and at intersections of arterials, while the rest of the former square-mile sections have generally filled with residential development, as well as schools, religious facilities, and parks. One example of this is famous Mile Road system of Detroit, Michigan. Occasionally, and more frequently in the metropolitan region's inner post-war suburbs than in outer areas, arterials are located at approximately half-mile intervals. This strictly regimented urban structure has coincided with a similarly strict practice of Euclidean zoning. In Euclidean zoning, use of a property is dictated and regulated by zoning district, the boundaries of which are often based on locations of arterials. West of the Appalachians, road systems frequently follow the PLSS grid structure. The results can be 90-degree intersections and very long stretches of straight roads. Popular culture the land system is an important part of American history and culture. Among other things, the stock phrases lower 40, front 40, back 40, and 40 acres and a mule, which are sometimes heard in American movies, reference the quarter section. The lower 40 and a quarter section is the one at lowest elevation, that is in the direction that water drains. The lower 40 is frequently the location of or the direction of a stream or a pond. The phrase 40 acres and a mule was the compensation apocryphally promised by the Freedmen's Bureau following the American Civil War. The idea of 40 work days in an acre came from a Gunter's chain calculation. At the time of the Homestead Act, 4 square perch equals 1 workday. RKO 40 acres was a film studio backlot for filming movies and TV shows such as King Kong, Gone with the Wind and Star Trek. 40 Acres and a Mule Filmworks is the production company of noted American filmmaker Spike Lee. Homesteading, another staple of American Western culture, was also dependent on the public land survey system. In the original Homestead Act of 1862, during the Lincoln administration, each settler was allocated 160 acres of land. In other words, a quarter section. Later amendments of the Homestead Act allocated more land, as much as 640 acres. In other words, a section. This was a good revision to apply to land that was drier or more desolate than the earlier, more desirable lands already settled. Many times, this land was more suited to ranching than to farming. The Hertag is a mythical creature and the mascot of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, created by Gene Shepard in 1893. A specimen of the creature was claimed to have been found in Section 37 of a local township. A township contains only 36 sections. See also: Groma Surveying, Louisiana Purchase State Park, Lot and Block Survey System, Dominion Land Survey. Meridians in the United States Principal Meridian, List of principal and guide meridians and baselines of the United States. References. External links: LSD plus GPS plus UTM coordinates conversion free map converters and tools, Bureau of Land Management, Manual of Instructions for the Survey of the Public Lands of the United States, 2009, Manual of Instructions for the Survey of the Public Lands of the United States, 1973, Official Manual for PLSS, Resources page of the U.S. Department of the Interior, Bureau of Land Management, National Land Information System, cadastral records and land parcel information including geocommunicator below, NILS geocommunicator, cadastral records and land parcel information. U.S. Geological Survey, National Geodetic Survey, American Congress on Surveying and Mapping, TRS data to latitude-longitude calculator, for 17 western U.S. states, www.resurvey.org, reference for land surveyors working in the PLSS, Federal Township Plats of Illinois, 1804-1891 from the Illinois State Archives, Researching New Mexico Land Grants, IIC Minnesota Historical Vegetation, the Minnesota Bearing Tree Database, the Principal Meridian Project, Locating Oil or Gas Wells using the Federal Township and Range System, lists of the coordinates used for section corners in Kansas City, Missouri, Wisconsin State Cartographer's Office, Curiosities and Trivia about the PLSS, Public Land Survey System in Google Earth, a free Google Earth implementation of the National Integrated Land System Geocommunicator Map Service, sample of PLSS in ESRI ArcGIS, Alabama PLSS,